everyone, my name is Josh and this is WHIMS Scream Musings. And today I'm going to be talking about Scream 3. This was released in 2000, written by Aaron Kruger, directed by Wes Craven and starring Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox and David Arquette. Now this film, before I actually begin with the overview of the film overall, this film came out in a very interesting time where there was a lot of concerns with the American government that they were having the classic age-old discussion of, does media violence contribute to real-life juvenile delinquency or real-life criminal behaviour in adolescents and youths? And the American government was basically really cracking down on any kind of media that presented this case, which was, video games like Grand Theft Auto, Manhunt, and what have you, or even, films like video nasty films of the 1980s and various other things were kind of, a sort of predecessor to that idea. But the Scream films were really kind of heavily criticised for this, especially when it comes to killings in high schools and things like that. So these films were very heavily criticised for basically encouraging juvenile delinquency in teenagers, and basically they really cracked down on Scream 3 and said, you've got to remove the violent and graphic death scenes, you've got to remove all the, aggressive and graphic and violent behaviour in this film, you've really got to dial it back. And Wes Craven literally put his foot down and said, oh, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to name it something else, because if you make a Scream film, you have certain standards to keep. And that's one of the things that I really do love about Wes Craven, and I think is really going to make him heavily missed in the horror industry, not just in the horror industry, but in the filmmaking community, because his films, I've seen most of his films. I haven't seen everything he's ever done, but I do feel like the films that I have seen of Wes Craven's have a little bit more to say about us as a society and about human nature, I think, as well, which I think is really wonderful about Wes Craven's work, is he really does talk about human nature. He talks about what it means to be, a human being, what it means to be a family, what it means to be, a community, and all these other things. You see that in the Nightmare on Elm Street films. You see that in films like Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes. So there's a lot of things in his films that really do give you a lot of food for thought, and I feel like he's a voice that is going to be genuinely missed in the horror community. And I think this really kind of shows in his work on the Scream films, is his films, even though they are very graphic and they are very violent a lot of the times, they never fail. And this is something that I think really gets me angry with these government types who basically knuckle down on all these creative types, all these filmmakers, all these novelists and all these playwrights and what have you, all these creative people that I relate to. They really just kind of say that, oh, you're to blame for this. And they don't want to look at the inner lives of these people, these teenagers. They want to basically blame something that's easy to blame books, blame films, what have you. And Wes Craven makes it very clear in the first film. Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven both make it very clear that these murders are affecting people's lives. Sidney Prescott is a perfect example of a final girl who actually has a story behind all the bloodshed and all the horror. She isn't just some dumb character who runs up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. Or she's a character who actually has a lot of trauma to deal with. And every character since then, and I think even, Sidney Prescott owes a lot to characters like Laurie Strode. They are survivors. They're people who actually, have dealt with this trauma, and they're not going to let it define them. And there are some cases of characters letting that trauma define them, like in the case of Halloween H2O, or in Halloween and Halloween 1 and Halloween 1, 2 and H2O. That's my perfect trilogy. I call it the Laurie and Michael trilogy, and I think that's a perfect example of someone not dealing with trauma very well, and Sidney Prescott, who is dealing with her trauma as best she can. So what's Scream 3 really about? Well, the film begins proper with Cotton Weary. He basically has become a successful celebrity after getting the chance to tell his side of the story at the end of Scream 2. At the end of Scream 2, he basically tries to encourage Sydney to give him an interview where he gets the chance to tell his side of the story with her in tow. And he literally does a very shady thing where he even considers letting Sydney die for the cause of, if she doesn't give him what he wants, he'll let her die. And that really adds a certain level of dimension, but it also gives us a certain sense of there's a dark side to Cotton Weary, and it really does make you quite concerned. Like, you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, you were literally going to let this poor woman die, Cotton. Like, are you really going to live with that on your conscience? Like, really?" But yeah, he's been in prison, and usually when you're an innocent man wrongly accused of a crime, that tends to do that to you. You tend to think a lot more, psychotically, or a lot more. There tends to be a lot more insanity that sort of drips into your psychology. Just ask Sirius Black in the Harry Potter series. He wasn't sane after being released from Azkaban, so yeah, there's that. Yeah, I really do think he's quite a sinister character, but he is a celebrity now, and he's got everything that he wants. He's got the house, he's got everything. Until he gets a phone call after speaking to his PR agent about potentially appearing in the new Stab film. He gets a phone call from someone who pretends to be a fan, only to reveal that it's actually Ghostface. And through a particular game, a very simple game that he has to play, answer wrong, him and his girlfriend die. Answer right, they all get to live. And the big question is, where is Sidney Prescott? Cotton doesn't answer, and he basically dies. But what's very interesting about this sequence is that Ghostface has a voice changer in which he's able to imitate people's voices. So I think that the killer in this film is able to basically have these phone calls with people, and he's also able to imitate their voices or have them speak to him through this phone call he's having, and it records their voices and matches their speech patterns perfectly so that he can actually imitate their voices successfully whilst in the Ghostface costume. That's quite a bit of a stretch, but I do think that whoever he's talking to, he's able to adopt their voices using this voice change technology. So to me, I think that's a very big clue as to it adds more to the suspense of Ghostface's voice, and it really gives you the sense like, oh, who is actually speaking? Is it the real person, or is it Ghostface imitating their voices? So it adds a certain level of suspense. That's one thing that I will definitely say that goes for this film. But what I really like is that the way they talk about this film does have a very interesting insight into the Hollywood making industry, especially when it comes to the casting couch discussion and all these other things about how producers can often manipulate these very impressionable young up and coming actresses or actors into, I'll give you whatever you want. I'll give you the parts that you really want, as long as you do me a few favours. And it's that kind of insight they really do knuckle down on in the sequel, and they really do kind of show how really seedy and how manipulative these producers can be. And this comes in the form, after Cotton Weary is murdered, he leaves a photo of a teenage Maureen Prescott on his corpse. And the person investigating this crime, Mark Kincaid, played by Patrick Dempsey, who, if you're a fan of Grey's Anatomy, plays Derek Shepherd in Grey's Anatomy, aka Dr. McDreamy. So there's that, and he basically is investigating the murders, Mark Kincaid, and he sends the photo, he presents the photo to Gail Weathers, who decides to go to Hollywood to investigate the crime. And it's here that she's reunited with Dewey. And it turns out that he is actually a creative consultant on the new Stab film, and he is basically chaperoning or looking after or potentially being in a relationship with an actress named Jennifer, who's playing Gail Weathers in this film. And she is one of the characters who I'm kind of not really a fan of, because she kind of presents herself as kind of the comic relief character. Like, she's kind of the very self-obsessed, diva type, film star who's very kind of airheaded and very kind of, oh, I don't want to be killed off on this film, I've got a career to think about, and all these other things. Like, she really just feels so self-obsessed and so, so full of herself that you really just kind of think to yourself, do I really care if this person lives or dies? Like, really, do I actually care? But throughout the course of the film, she does actually kind of present a lot of very interesting, funny moments throughout the film. Like, there's this one scene where after a big death scene, she's rolling down the hill, and she basically just screams as she's falling, "I can't stop myself falling down the hill!" So there are funny moments like that, but then one of my favourite moments is when they confront this film producer named Milton, played by the wonderful Lance Henriksen, who is Bishop from Aliens, and he's been in a lot of other things as well, who I think is absolutely awesome. He's a fantastic actor. But yeah, he plays a seedy film producer called Milton, and she basically, Jennifer says what a lot of us are all thinking. She basically says, oh please, like, you have made millions off of the story of her murder. And then she starts to get very melodramatic and say things like, you are obsessed with her and you are obsessed with her daughter. And then Gail Weathers comes in and she goes, okay, easy Geraldo. That there's stuff like that I just really love, like the comic double act of Jennifer and Gail Weathers is something that we never thought we needed, but we actually needed for this film. So it presents a lot of very interesting levity in this film, especially when it comes to the backstory of Maureen Prescott and how she was an up and coming actress called Regina Reynolds, who basically was trying to become an actress, but then Milton kind of persuaded her that if you do certain favours for certain producers, I'll give you the parts that you want, kind of character. It really does kind of add a certain level of sophistication and a certain level of, being very topical to this film. But it really does kind of, the humour does present a lot of levity to those scenes and really give a lot of light relief to these very dark topics. And yes, the deaths aren't as gory and the deaths are kind of more goofy than they are gory or, disturbing. But I think it really kind of adds a lot to, the comedy adds a lot to the much more darker moments in regards to the themes. And it really kind of makes the backstory of Maureen Prescott extra tragic, because we're led to believe in the first film that she basically was the product of the bored housewife archetype of, the person who's so, she's loyal to her husband, but she can't help but, fall into the net of, meeting another man and, all these other things when her very loyal husband is, away working and things like that. So we kind of get the impression that she was just a bored housewife and she just basically had this affair because she was bored or she wasn't getting enough attention from her husband. But it adds a certain level of it does add a certain level of tragedy to her story. Not that it wasn't already tragic enough. I mean, the fact that Sydney lost her mother and the fact that, her husband lost his wife in this very horrific way is awful enough. But the fact that, she did this because she basically created in herself that she kind of had no choice but to kind of embrace this kind of almost dark side of herself that feels like, oh, I need to, have a quick fling. I can't have these big attachments because if I do, it's not going to last very long, kind of thing. I like that idea that she kind of felt like she didn't feel like she deserved the life that she got, so she basically, went out and had this fling with Billy's father. This led to all this horrible drama going on. But I really do think it's really tragic, and I really do think the writing in this film is really well done, especially when it comes to kind of connecting the dots with the first two films. And you really can tell that Aaron Kruger did his research in regards to the plotting of this film. And I really do think, yes, he didn't get the characters all that much, but I feel like he still managed to create some very good scenes with the scenes that we got with characters like Gail Weathers or Dewey Riley. I think he really did understand that, and he really kind of, tried to embody as much of that as he could into his screenplay for this film. But what I think is very interesting about this this particular film is how Sydney is enveloped in this film. She basically keeps having hallucinations of her dead mother Maureen throughout the course of the film, and she eventually gets a phone call from Ghostface, and this kind of prompts her to jump out of hiding and to immediately assist with the investigation. So while she's on the set for Stab 3, she basically, there's this really powerful moment where she goes into the set and she sees the Stu Mocker house, she sees her house, she sees the house where the murders took place, and there's this really heartbreaking moment where she's looking through the set and she just basically sees the garage where her friend Tatum Riley was killed, and then she goes upstairs to the room and she sees the crime scene of basically where her mother was brutally murdered, and there's that really horrible moment where she covers her mouth and the look in her eyes, honestly, that scene, I wasn't expecting to get weepy, but I could have found myself going, oh my god, like I can't believe I'm actually getting, choked up over this scene, because it's quite horrific. Because really think about it, Sydney has actually watched her mother get murdered, and she literally has had this entire nightmare chase her from the very first film, and now these producers are making money off of her tragedy, and that's something that really is horrible. And it kind of ties into something that Scream 4 highlights, which is Dewey what Riley says something very poignant in the fourth film, which is one generation's tragedy is another generation's joke. And that's something that really kind of feels, it feels very apt for the filmmaking industry. Like they're not interested in telling the story from the point of view of the victims, because who wants that kind of thing? Like we want to know how we can sell toys, we want to know how we can sell merchandise and all these other things. We want to have people come out in their droves like it's an Avengers film kind of thing. And it really just kind of undervalues the trauma and the tragedy of the victims. And I think the Scream films, that's why I love the Scream films. They don't focus so much on the killers and how awesome the killers are, or how it's not trying to relish what Ghostface does, because Ghostface does these horrific murders, but we're not cheering. You don't see the crowd cheer when Ghostface kills someone. We're actually really heartbroken, or we're really kind of we're really almost kind of terrified or disturbed or on the verge of tears in a lot of cases, like with a lot of these deaths. It's like with Gale and Dewey in Scream 2. Like we're literally like Gale in that moment when Dewey gets stabbed. Like we're literally like her. We have our hands over our mouths and we're almost pushed to tears. We're not cheering. We're not cheering the killer. We're actually kind of condemning the killer and saying, "You piece of shit." Like we hope you get hung at the end of this film. Like we hope you get arrested and thrown in jail. We don't want you to continue to thrive. We're not doing the Jason Voorhees thing where we're kind of almost cheering or laughing at the death scenes. We're actually really taking it seriously, and we're seeing it from the point of view of the victims. And I think that's the beauty of this film, and what I think is the beauty of the entire trilogy as a whole. And this film, like the first two films, the first film focuses on horror films, the second film focuses on sequels. This film focuses on the trilogy. And the trilogy basically highlights three very important rules. The first rule is that you have a very invincible killer. Killing him won't work, stabbing him won't work. You basically either got to decapitate him or blow him up, essentially. Set him on fire or blow him up. And this rule is basically given to us via Randy Meeks through a video message that he pre-recorded at the midpoint of Scream 2 before his death. And he basically says these rules. One of them is the invincible killer. The second rule is that the past is not at rest. Whatever you think you know about the past is basically all a lie. There's something that's going to come into the fold that's going to flip the script, which kind of comes into play with the backstory of Maureen Prescott, how she was an up-and-coming actress and how she basically was traumatised by all the abuse and everything that went on with the producer Milton. And then mingling that in with the backstory carried over from the first film. And then we also have the aspect that a main character could potentially die, and that means Sidney Prescott, and they do flirt with that at the finale of the film. But this film was just so well thought out, and I really do like the fact that Kevin Williamson did have this kind of a vision for this entire series, and I just think it's brilliantly done. And I really do like the fact that Ehren Kruger, despite the fact that there are some problems with this film, he did try to keep to the tone and he tried to stay true to Kevin Williamson's original outline, and I really do respect this film for that. And this film is just fantastic. I really love it. I really do like the fact that this film does try to include things that everyone could possibly want, and it's very hard when you're doing a third film because you really do want to stay true to those other two films. But this film was a really good run, and I really do feel that everyone in this film really tried their best to make the best film they possibly could, even though it may not be perfect, even though it may not be good as the other two, or even the very first one. They still tried their hardest to remake a really good film. I really do have to give props to everyone involved for just that. And I And I just love these films, I really do. And what I really love about these films is the murder mystery aspect. I like the fact that Ghostface is his own personality. We have the Roger L. Jackson voice, but outside of that, Ghostface is literally an enigma every single time. You literally don't know who is under that mask, and anybody could be under that mask. Anybody could be committing these murders. Anybody could be, wielding the cloak and the mask at any point in the knife and anything like that. So that aspect of it, that they try to weave a classical, almost an Agatha Christie style whodunit in with this very kind of almost slasher film type premise. That's a very interesting idea, and I really do again have to applaud Kevin Williamson for doing that. So, my personal opinion, this film, spoiler alert by the way for Scream 3, so if you don't want to be spoiled by this film, I would suggest clicking off. And if you want to watch the Scream films, they're all available on Paramount Plus. And all 5 Scream films to date are on Paramount Plus, so if you want to go check them out, go to that source. But yeah, if you don't want to be spoiled by Scream 3, please click off the video now and come back and join me when you actually finish it and say, oh wow, that ending was great, right? But yeah, I really do like it, so I'm going to give those people a chance to click off and go somewhere else and go and watch the film. And I'll wait. So, I hope you're all gone now. I hope you're all clicked off. And I hope that, the people who have seen the third film watch it. So basically, the big twist of this film is there is one killer, even though technically it was originally meant to be 2 killers in this film. I personally still think there is still a hint that there could be a second killer, but they were killed before they were unmasked. And one of the killers is meant to be Angela, who in the film is an actress, but she is playing Sidney Prescott in this new film. And the reason why I think so is that she basically, she kind of switches back and forth. She goes from this person who really kind of cares about the moral implications of releasing a film like this. Like she says, I'll happily work on this film if it's not at the expense of people's lives. But then she'll quite happily, keep props from the production, like say for example the Ghostface mask. Like if you care about the moral implications of this film, isn't kind of adopting the mask kind of counterintuitive to your claim of being morally superior kind of thing? Like what's the deal there, Angela? Like what's going on there? So I think she was the killer to begin with. She was the initial first killer, but she was killed before she was unmasked. And she has this scene where Sydney goes to the bathroom and she basically catches Angela in the act of getting into the Ghostface costume. How I know this is she's wearing very similar shoes to what to what Billy Loomis was wearing when he adorned the Ghostface costume. And also she wears sort of like a skirt that looks very similar in tone to the sort of, it's the sort of piece of clothing that she could actually adopt to properly blend into the Ghostface costume. And I think that was one of the things that made me think, oh yeah, you're definitely the Ghostface killer. But not only that, but when she leaves the room and she goes out the door, outside door of the bathroom that leads directly onto the set, and when Sydney goes to pursue her, she goes out into that set room and she has that really powerful scene where she's looking at all the sets, and it eventually leads to the scene where she sees the crime scene of Maureen Prescott, her mother, and things like that. And I thought, oh no, that's not something that just happened to be there. That wasn't just a happy accident. She genuinely was trying to lure Sydney to her death in that moment, I feel like. And there is also a perfect example of there being 2 Ghostface killers. The one who's actually chasing her upstairs to her room, and the whole entire scene where she goes into her room, but it's actually a set and it's actually an add-on. That entire sequence was supposed to be Angela, I feel like, or Angela is the one who actually grabs her out of the window, actually bursts through the window and grabs her and tries to throw her out of the set. That I think was Angela, and there's also a lot of different things that I do find very weird, like when the house explodes in one sequence. there's a moment where she actually jumps down with everybody else, but then she ends up coming out unscathed. Like, she's not covered in grass or earth or anything like that. Like, she's completely unscathed. She's walking down the hill as opposed to just, getting up after rolling down the hill or anything like that. So I think that these are all clues that hints to the fact that she's the killer. And the way she acts during the rap party at Roman's mansion feels very weird to me as well, because she was very panicky during the script reading scene, the facts reading, script reading page scene. And then she kind of acts very coy and very almost flirtatious to her cast members and various other people. She's making those very odd observations and jokes. I'm just thinking, 2 people have died during your production. I thought you were meant to be the morally superior one and saying things like, I'm not doing this if this is at the expense of other people's lives, kind of thing. And then she says, oh, I was collecting props for the film. And I thought, well, this prop that you've chosen is also symbolic of the murders in Woodsboro. Like, why would you collect that souvenir if you were against the idea of this being at the expense of other people's lives? So there's so many inconsistencies with her stories. So I think, yep, she's the second killer. But I think Roman killed her after the Sydney discovers her in the bathroom stall moment, because I think that's when he realised that, oh, she's a liability, I've got to kill her off at some point. And that's when Roman is unmasked. Sydney goes to the mansion, and she manages to find Dewey and Gale, who have been apprehended by Ghostface. But she manages to untie them, and she manages to have a confrontation with Ghostface, which leads to Mark Kincaid, Patrick Dempsey coming to rescue her. But then, of course, he gets injured by Ghostface at some point, and this leads to Sydney going on a chase with Ghostface, which leads into the private screening room. And that's where we get the big reveal that Ghostface is in fact Roman, who was the director of Stab 3. The big problem with this reveal is I don't think it works, because to me, I think the big problem I have with this scene is that Roman and Sydney never actually met. So when it's revealed that Roman is the killer, it doesn't really have that effect of, oh, it's you kind of thing. It's more like, who the hell are you? Like, I've never met you before. Who the hell are you? It's like, oh my god, some guy is Ghostface. I've never met him before. Whereas the other Ghostface reveals actually feel like they get that emotional reaction from Sydney, like, oh, it's you, it's Billy, it's Stu, and all these other things. So it actually feels like it's people that she knows. Like, even in the second film, when Ghostface is revealed and it's revealed to be Mrs. Loomis, it actually genuinely has a shock for her. Like, oh, Mrs. Loomis? Like, really? And then Gail does that thing where she goes, wow, really? That can't be true. I've seen pictures of you. And then there's that wonderful exchange where Sydney goes in the second film, like, it's just after a couple of bits of Botox and a couple of facelifts later that she's managed to look like this. And then Mrs. Loomis goes, oh, it's a makeover, Gail. You should try it sometime. Yeah, I love that exchange. Like, Sydney knows that she's probably going to die, but she just kind of throws as much shade as she can at Mrs. Loomis as possible. Like, oh, you're just as crazy as your son was. Love it. Anyway, tangent. But I really do like this exchange, and I like this reveal because it basically ties back to the fact that, oh, he was the one who encouraged Billy to basically pursue this killing spree to kill Maureen Prescott. And the reason why was because Maureen basically abandoned Roman. He showed up several years later to her door, and she basically rejected him and said, you're Regina Reynolds' son, you're not Maureen Prescott's son, I'm a different person now. Which is horrible, really, the fact that his mother abandoned him. But in many ways, I don't think it should encourage you to become a killer, because to me, I feel like he still was able to become a director. He was still able to become a director and have these very successful gigs where he could direct these films and direct the films that he wanted. He doesn't want to direct stab 3, but he wants to direct something else, which eventually leads to the killing spree. But part of me feels like you still have a very successful career, dude. You don't have to worry about, mother's love and things like that. But then again, that's just me thinking from a business money-making standpoint. We all want, a mother's love and things like that. So to me, or the love of a family, a good, strong family unit. And I think because Roman lost that, he tried to use his connections in Hollywood and his means of pulling strings from various different people to kind of get back to Sydney and kind of, try to give her the chance to really go through what he went through, which is he ruined his life, he lost his family, and in return she got what he wanted, a happy family, a good life. So he tries to frame her for the murder of Milton, and he cuts Milton's throat in front of Sydney, and he tries to also pin a lot of the murders on her by actually, like I said, the phone call. She was able to, communicate with Ghostface that way. And while he was on the phone to her, he was actually recording her voice with that special voice changer. So that's how he does it, I think. And then he's able to, imitate Sydney's voice and, try to frame her for the murders. But he doesn't succeed. There's a really good scuffle where she actually, is able to outsmart him. She uses the bulletproof vest that he used to pretty much fool everybody else into thinking that he's invincible, and that's when she's able to deal with the killing blow. She actually is able to use an ice pick on him at one point, which I really liked. I like the fact that she was able to actually stab him for once, and it kind of reminds me of a death scene that happens much later in the series, but I'll get to that when I cover Scream 5. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. I love the fact that, Sydney got the chance to, really give a Ghostface killer a taste of their own medicine and say, now you know what it's like to be, gutted, or you know what it's like to be stabbed, kind of thing. Like, how does it feel? Like, that's such a good moment. Oh, I love it. And I want to talk about it when we get to Scream 5, but I'm really holding on. And my family could be watching this as well. I hope they don't, watch my Scream 5 review, because I'm going to be spoiling the hell out of that film when I get to. So, family, if you're watching this, please get to Scream 5 quickly. I can't wait to discuss that film. I honestly can't. I really am looking forward to it. So, yeah. But I love aspects of this film. I think it's so good. What they were able to do with the stuff that they got really is a massive achievement in my eyes. But so Roman's defeated, the Ghostface killings are over, and, Sydney can finally rest in peace knowing that she, has had this chance to, say goodbye to the past, bury the past, and move on with her life. And there's that wonderful scene where she's about to lock up the house and she's about to put the code in to put the locks on the door, but then she just leaves it out of instinct, and there's that entire exchange with her and Kincaid where they say, oh, you're here already? Like, oh, come on, we're about to watch a movie and things like that. And she goes, oh, I'll be along in a minute. And then there's that moment where she goes to go and do something, and she looks back at the door, and the door opens, and you see the sunlight come in. And I just love that scene. It's just such a wonderful moment, because it shows that it's like Wes Craven is saying, okay, this is the end. Let's say goodbye to Sydney. Let's say goodbye to Dewey and Gale and move on. Let's, end the story. That's it. It's done. Finito. No, we're done now. We can move on. And it's really actually kind of really poignant, and it really adds a certain level of, oh, this feels nice. This feels really nice that, it ends here. Sydney's in a good place. There's a potential relationship being hinted at between her and Mark Kincaid as well, which I think is very interesting. So there's a lot of stuff being built up there and a lot of stuff being referenced. And I feel like that's something that I really do like, that we've left these characters in a good place. Dewey and Gale. Again, I hope my family aren't listening to this, because they're in the middle of watching Scream 1 and 2 and 3, so I hope they don't. They're not watching this ending. But yeah, don't watch the rest of this. If you haven't listened to my spoiler warning by now, hopefully this will encourage you to click off the video now, please. But yeah, we're left in a good place. Sydney has now moved on with her life. Dewey and Gail are engaged, and you really do get the sense that there's a bit of a relationship being hinted at between Mark Kincaid and Sydney as well. So there's a lot of stuff being tied up, and it just feels like a very perfect ending. And then Scream 4 comes into the mix, but I will get to that very soon. And I'll hopefully be recording more videos outside of the Scream videos, but I am going to take a little bit of a break from the Scream films. I'll hopefully be posting another video later on today. So that's my thoughts on Scream 3. It's a 4 out of 5 star film for me. I really do think this is a good one, even though a lot of people might say I can see why people don't like it. But I do think there's a lot of stuff in here that I do feel really does provide a lot of good food for thought. So I hope people can look at this film and actually appreciate some of the things that it does try to do well, as opposed to the more negative aspects. And I hope people can actually see, I hope this videos could have shone a little bit of a different light on this film and actually presented a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of interesting things to talk about. But yeah, that's been my review for Scream 3, and I hope you're all having a very good day. Take care, bye-bye for now.